Hello, welcome to 3.3. Analyze Dickens' use of characters to explore the class division in Victorian England. Why is it called Victorian England? Because it's England during the rule of Queen Victoria. Just a little bit of trivia there for you. Okay, now we're going to dive right into chapters 9 and 10. I hope you're keeping notes. Remember, plot on the left side, theme on the right side. Here's a lot of the glossary. Again, I'm not going to read that. Well, a couple of them are. Well, let's look at it. Premium, an extra sum of money. Caparisoned. Yeah, that's probably how it's pronounced. Dressed in rich clothing. Ignominious, shameful or dishonorable. Ruminate, to contemplate or reflect in one's mind. Cogitate, to ponder. Ruminate and cogitate are fairly similar. Think about stuff. Felicitous, well suited for some purpose or situation. Reverence, honor or respect. Consolatory, comforting. To console is the root there, console. Dexterous, clever or skillful. Sanguinary, bloodthirsty, murderous. Visage or visage, the face or appearance of a person. Abject, very bad or severe, like abject terror. Inscrutable, not easily understood. Ostentatious, attracting or seeking to attract attention. Maudlin, weakly sentimental. Plume, a feather. Guinea, an English coin. Okay, now that we've done that. Plot summary, chapters 9 and 10. Pip returns home from Miss Havisham's Satis house, and because Pumblechook and Mrs. Joe are intensely curious about his experience, and he thinks they wouldn't believe the truth, spins a fantastic story. Mr. Joe then repeats Pip's story. Mrs. Joe then repeats Pip's story to Joe, and Pip is embarrassed that someone he loves has now heard his lie. Pip later confesses to Joe that he made up the story, upsetting Joe that Pip would lie. Pip's guilt deepens, and he confesses how miserable and common he feels. In an attempt to become uncommon, especially to Estella, Pip asks Biddy to teach him. I think Biddy's a girl. I haven't said. Right, so he comes from the dark, dusty, messed up house, and he's like, that lady was so crazy, if I tell them the truth, they won't believe it. So he tells them about this giant fancy mansion, and everything is amazing. And they eat it up. One night, Pip fetches Joe at the tavern, where Joe, Wopsle, and a secret-looking stranger sit near the kitchen fire. When the stranger learns Joe's last name, he orders rum for the group. The stranger is very interested to understand Pip's relation to Joe. He stirs his rum with a file which only Pip can see. Pip realizes with a start it's the file he stole for the convict. The stranger gives Pip a wrapped shilling, and when he and Joe arrive home, Mrs. Joe realizes the shilling is actually wrapped in 2 one-pound notes, which is like a lot of money for them. That's 2 pounds and a penny, which is kind of a lot of money for them. Literary devices. These chapters continue the themes of uncertainty, guilt, and social class. Pip becomes angry at Pumblechook and Mrs. Joe's prodding about the Satis house, and his anger and uncertainty lead him to spin an elaborate lie. He isn't guilty about this lie until it's repeated to Joe, whom he loves. He doesn't love Pumblechook or Mrs. Joe, his own sister, right? Well, I mean, it's understandable. She's pretty abusive. Pip's ambition is seen for the first time here. He tries to rise from his social class by studying with Biddy, actively trying to change his situation. His motivation is Estella, and his unhappiness seems to come from the comparison of himself and his family to Estella and Miss Havisham. However, Joe provides a different perspective on the idea of common versus uncommon, believing that integrity is what makes a person uncommon, defined as extraordinary rather than upper class. While Pip agrees, he still seeks to study with Biddy, preoccupied with Estella's opinion of him. The mysterious stranger introduces the symbol of money as something which represents importance that will eventually result in disappointment. This is part of Dickens' commentary on British society. Pip knows that his stranger is related to his convict in some way, and he is worried to be associated with a low-class person. But the convict also gives him money, or the person with the file, the shady-looking guy with the file, actually gives him money, which is foreshadowing, because we're going to find out that the person who's giving Pip a lot of money and his great expectations is indeed the convict from the first chapter. Exercise more imagery. Okay, here's a block of text from the actual story. And then I told Joe that I felt very miserable, and that I hadn't been able to explain myself to Mrs. Joe and Pumblechook, who were so rude to me, and that there had been a beautiful young lady at Miss Havisham's who was dreadfully proud, and that she had said I was common, and that I knew I was common, and that I wished I was not common, and that the lies had come of it somehow, though I didn't know how. What's the theme that expressed by Pip? Doubt and uncertainty. He doesn't even know where the lie came from. He just knows that he doesn't like feeling common. And why is he miserable? Because he doesn't like feeling common. Okay, plot summary. This is chapters 11 and 12. Pip visits Miss Havisham. Yeah, look at that. Now read chapters 11 and 12. They do want you to read the full chapters. Pip visits Miss Havisham again, and Estella introduces him to a group of visitors who strike Pip as phony. Like they're just putting on airs and they're acting real fake and smiley, and you know what fake is. Yeah. Estella asks Pip if he still finds her insulting. That she slaps him when he states that she isn't as insulting as before. Pip tells her he won't let her make him cry anymore, but admits to himself that he is crying inside. He still feels shame and inferiority due to Estella. She leaves Pip in a dark, boarded-up dressing room with a table centerpiece overhung with cobwebs. Miss Havisham reveals that the centerpiece is her wedding cake. She explains that she will be laid on the table for visitors to feast upon her when she dies. While Pip and Estella again play cards, Miss Havisham requires Pip to notice Estella's beauty. In the garden, Pip fights a... Wow, they're just jumping over big stuff. Okay. Yeah, so here, while Pip and Estella play cards again, Miss Havisham requires Pip to notice Estella's beauty. She's like, look at her. Isn't she the most beautiful woman you've ever seen? Well, girl. They're still... I think they're kids, and they're maybe like 13. And he's like, yeah, no, she's real pretty. I get it. It's because Miss Havisham wants him to languish in desire. She wants him to want Estella and know that he can't have Estella because he's too low class. He goes out to the garden, and Pip fights a pale young gentleman who headbutts his stomach. Pip fights back, and eventually the boy gives up. Afterwards, when Pip is leaving, Estella allows him to kiss her cheek. We're led to assume that she saw the fighting and thus raised her opinion of Pip as the victor, but he thinks it's meaningless. Pip worries that winning the fight may be a crime, and wonders if the law will seek him out, seeing more of that guilt, or whether Miss Havisham will seek revenge. Pip then tells about his experiences with Miss Havisham and Estella over the following months. He often pushes Miss Havisham in her wheelchair while she asks him questions. At times, Estella is cordial, but at other times condescending. Pip admits to Miss Havisham that Estella is getting prettier. Pip keeps these experiences from Joe because he fears Joe will think he is lying again, but he does confide in Biddy, who listens with deep concern. Eventually, Miss Havisham tells Pip to bring Joe to see her. So he's kind of leading two separate lives at this point, one in Miss Havisham's house and one at home with Joe and Mrs. Joe. And so when Miss Havisham asks him to introduce Joe to her, it's like his two worlds colliding, and it's really weird for him. Okay. In the exchange between literary devices, in the exchange between Pip and the pale young gentleman, we can see another of the literary devices Dickens employs: parallelism, which is the use of identical grammatical constructions in sequential phrases or clauses. Read this excerpt. So it's gonna repeat not in the exact words, but in the way the words are put together. "Stop a minute, though," he said, wheeling round before we had gone many paces. "I ought to give you a reason for fighting, too. There it is." In a most irritating manner he instantly slapped his hands against one another, daintily flung one of his legs up behind him, pulled my hair, slapped his hands again, dipped his head, and butted it into my stomach. Here he instantly slapped his hands together, uh, daintily flung one of his legs up behind him, follows a parallel construction of instantly, daintily, past tense, slapped, flung, prepositional phrase, against one up behind him. Then Dickens does it again, this time with the construction of a past tense verb, direct object repeated 4 times. Pulled my hair, slapped his hands, dipped his head, butted it. This is one of the many devices that describes the Dickensian style. Parallelism. It's constructed in the same sort of way. These chapters heavily focus on the idea of social class and ambition. Many of the characters introduced are using Miss Havisham for financial and social gain. She's wise to it, though, knowing they'll feast upon her fortune when she dies. Mrs. Joe and Pumblechook have similar ambitions for Pip, and therefore themselves, with relation to Miss Havisham. Joe and Biddy, who can see that Miss Havisham's behavior is disturbing, seem to be exceptions. Dickens uses satire to poke fun at those who favor social mobility over love, calling Miss Sarah Pocket a little dry, brown, corrugated old woman. The rotted wedding cake contrasts the image of hope and new life, marriage, with the harsh reality of death, because it's like gross and overgrown with cobwebs, and she talks about death. Pip is confused by his interactions with Miss Havisham and Estella. He overhears her telling Estella to break his heart, but he is mesmerized by both women and infatuated with Estella. Yeah, he overhears Miss Havisham telling her daughter, Estella, that you must break this young boy's heart. Okay. Starting to get a little harder to track the story, but I think we're all right. How is Camilla described in both in action and in appearance? Who's Camilla? How does Dickens use satire to describe Camilla? Why is Camilla so focused on Miss Havisham? You didn't even mention a person named Camilla. Okay, how about this? Great Expectations, Camilla. Not Cora. Character list from Cliff's Notes. There we go. Stella, Molly, Control F. Camilla, Mrs. Camilla, Mr. Raymond, Cousin Raymond, Mr. Camilla. Sarah Pocket, Georgiana Pocket. Miss Havisham's toady relatives who pretend to care but are waiting to inherit her money. They resent Pip and see him as a threat. Okay. So Camilla's one of those fake people that are sucking up to Miss Havisham because they want her money. All right, moving on to chapters 13 and 14. Joe visits Miss Havisham's, accompanied to Pumblechook's by Mrs. Joe in her finest attire. Joe is uncomfortable in Miss Havisham's home and stumbles through answers, while Pip is mortified by Joe's uneducated speech. She gives Joe 25 guineas as payment for what Pip has earned at her house. She tells Pip not to return. He is now officially Joe's apprentice. Mrs. Joe was offended and hurt that she wasn't invited, but Joe lies and tells her Miss Havisham sent her compliments to cheer her up. The adults hurry Pip to town hall to have him officially bound as an apprentice by a judge, which is apparently a thing that happens. Pumblechook is so rough with Pip that others think him a criminal. They celebrate with dinner, the adults in high spirits and rowdy, but Pip depressed at his fate, and in his experiences in his apprenticeship, feeling about Joe's trade, I had liked it once, but once was not now. So he's kind of had a taste of the finer life, and he's starting to kind of look down on being Joe's apprentice. Joe's social class is further explored with his awkwardness interacting with Miss Havisham. So in my head, I kind of imagine it as Miss Havisham talking in this really fancy accent, and she's very clear with the way she pronounces things. And then Joe's got like a hick accent. He talks like that, and it's real embarrassing for Pip because he don't like it when his family sounds like they from the country. And so he's just sitting there like shaking his head, like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're embarrassing me like this." Pip is embarrassed by Joe and is despondent at the thought of becoming an apprentice. His standards have changed. His time and status has changed him, and Joe's life is no longer enough. Everything he enjoyed before meeting Estella now dissatisfies him. A curtain dropped so heavy and black. You just gonna pull that quote out and not explain why you used it? That's rude. He walks miserably. His low spirits mimic the flat, low landscape of the marshes. Pip fantasizes of becoming a soldier or sailor and escape from his common life. Okay. Fantasizes about becoming a soldier or a sailor rather than be an apprentice. The theme of money is further explored here. Miss Havisham views Pip's work as good, so she pays a good sum. The value of money representing the value of a person's work, however, quickly changes to money representing what's valued most in life when Pumblechook and Mrs. Joe become involved. Money is a sign of status for them, so much so that the cheap Mrs. Joe offers to buy everyone dinner, and Pumblechook feeds the lie that he orchestrated the payment from the beginning. Actions and appearances. Pip says, "I should never like Joe's trade. I had liked it once, but once was not now." Do you see evidence that Pip's relationship with Joe has changed? Yes. Uh, when he's embarrassed of Joe. He used to be proud of Joe, thinking Joe was the man with integrity. Now he's embarrassed of Joe's low upbringing. What was his attitude about Joe's trade before his encounters with the Havisham family? Um, if he had one, it was that it was inevitable, and it was the life he was supposed to lead. And what's his attitude after these encounters? That the job is beneath him. Chapter 15, and we're almost done with lesson 3. Okay. Pip ends his education, but continues studying and teaching Joe. So, I guess his education from Biddy, but he continues studying on his own. He admits that he wants Joe to learn to read because he hopes it will raise Joe's social status, especially in Estella's eyes. He sees Joe's commonness as a smear on his own status. So he's, guilty by association. He doesn't want to seem low because he's related to somebody low. Joe grants Pip a half holiday to visit Miss Havisham. Joe's lazy journeyman, Orlick. Oh, that's who Orlick is. A journeyman is a professional assistant. So Orlick is the assistant blacksmith, but he's lazy. Okay, so Joe's lazy journeyman Orlick gets wind of Pip's time off and demands a half holiday for himself. Joe agrees, but Mrs. Joe accuses him of wasting wages. Joe and Orlick fight, with Joe easily winning. Then Joe and Mrs. Joe get into a fight, yelling insults. Okay, they use the word fight both times, but Joe and Orlick get into an actual fist fight, and Joe and Mrs. Joe are just in an argument. There's a difference there. Pip goes to Miss Havisham to thank her, although he is hesitant, believing she will think Pip wants something from her. Miss Havisham senses that he is there to see Estella, who is studying abroad, and delights in his sadness. On his way home, Pip is invited by Mr. Wopsle to the Pumblechookian parlor to read a tragedy. Wopsle then pokes fun at Pip as an apprentice, like the character. What? To read a tragedy. The character in the tragedy they're reading. On the walk home, Wopsle and Pip come across Orlick, who tells them the Hulk's guns have been firing, signaling more escaped convicts. Okay. The theme of social class divisions is highlighted by the fact that in Victorian England it's uncommon for the social classes to mingle, which can be seen by Joe, Miss Havisham, and Sarah Pocket's initial uneasiness with Pip's visit. To learn more about it, visit this. Nah, I'm okay. Another literary device that Dickens employs is tapping into another play to reinforce his novel. This is an allusion. Allusion meaning, a reference to another work. Pip joins Wopsle at Pumblechook's home to read the part of Barnwell in the tragedy of George Barnwell. The adults pick on Pip as if the character's actions, he murders his uncle for one, were actually committed by Pip. Barnwell is an apprentice in the play. Pip is sarcastic about this association, calling the play an affecting tragedy. Affecting meaning like specifically trying to manipulate your emotions. Like it's trying to make me cry, and I can see that, and I'm not gonna buy into it. Later, the walk home is described as misty, a device Dickens uses to symbolize the lack of clarity and knowledge. Pip is unaware that something major has happened that will change his whole world. Orlick, Wopsle, and Pip then pass a crowd that informs them someone has broken into the forge. When Pip arrives, Joe and a surgeon kneel next to Mrs. Joe, who has been knocked out by a blow to the head. Dickens' description of Orlick slouching symbolizes his moral squalor. Remember that as you continue to read. Okay, so at the end of the chapter, Mrs. Joe, his sister, is unconscious, possibly dying. And it looks like we won't hit the answer to whether she lives until next chapter. Premium we already did. Is this just all the ones from earlier? Okay, we already read those. Alright, I'll see you in the next.